Stacker allows you to create custom internal tools, enabling you to specify exactly which data from your spreadsheets your team can see and how they can interact with it. Today we're going to walk through setting up an app for a takeaway distribution company in Stacker, powered by their data in Airtable. Here is the Airtable base that this company has been using to manage the process of onboarding new restaurants. You can see they've got a restaurants table with information relevant to each restaurant. We've then got associated menu items and the documentation relevant to their onboarding. We're going to create an internal tool in Stacker that makes the process of onboarding new restaurants so much easier. Let's have a look. Here we have the finished app that we're going to be building today. You can see that we've got an all restaurants table, which allows us to really easily review all of the restaurants that we're currently managing. If we click onto a particular restaurant, we can see a detailed view containing all the information we have about that restaurant. And we've also got tabs up here with the associated menu items and documents that are relevant only to this specific restaurant. If we now navigate to the status tracking table, we can see here that we've got a really nice overview of which status each restaurant is at throughout the onboarding process. We've got two job roles associated with this process. One is the acquisition team, which manages adding new leads and taking them through to being signed. And then we've got the onboarding team, which takes restaurants that have just signed all the way through to being live. Let's go and preview as each of these in order to see what the process is like for them. I'm now previewing as someone from the acquisitions team. You can see here that they just have the My Leads table. This is because they will be managing leads up until they're being signed. You can see here they've only got 2 leads, and that's because these are the 2 that are linked to them. If we click into one in particular, you can see here that I am linked to it as the acquiring agent, and I can review the information that I've got on this restaurant, and when I'm happy that I want to move them from contacted to signed, I can press the signed button, and it's going to ask me to assign it to an onboarding agent. This is going to mean that the onboarding agent can then take over this from this restaurant and move them through to being live. So I'm going to assign it to our test onboarding agent. And if I wanted to, I could upload the contract of them having signed here. If I now switch to previewing as the onboarding test user, we can now see that they have a My Clients table. In this table, they have all of the clients that have signed or further on along the process that are assigned to them specifically. You can see that this restaurant that we just assigned to by the other user has now appeared in this list. They can then go through and move each of these restaurants through the different stages and update them so that when they eventually reach the end, they've got all of the restaurants live. We're now going to walk through the process of recreating the app that we just looked at. Let's get started. I'm first going to go and connect the Airtable base that we looked at previously. If you need help with this step, you can look at our documentation for more instructions. Now that we've connected our base, if I press done, you can see that Stacker's first going to prompt me to add a user. I don't want to add all of my users from my team yet because the app isn't ready, but I am going to add one of my colleagues who is going to help me with the configuration of this app. So I'll add her as an admin. Now that we've done that, we can see the default app that Stacker has created from our Airtable base. We've got a restaurants table, the menu items, and all of the documents. I actually don't want the menu items and the documents to appear in the navigation, as I only want the relevant items to be accessible through the restaurant that they're linked to. So we're going to first go and turn these 2 tables off. We're going to do this in our navigation settings. I'm just going to turn the 2 tables off. And now we're going to start by editing the restaurant layouts that we've got. I'm first going to create the All Restaurants table that we first looked at in the completed app. To do this, I'm going to go to Restaurants and open up Edit Layout. I'm first going to rename it to be All Restaurants. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it into card mode because I want to see the logo really clearly, but at the minute it's not quite fitting, so I'm going to make sure that it does. And then I'm going to choose which fields I want to display. So I don't want my notes or another logo, but I do want to know which cuisine each restaurant is. Now that that's done, I'm going to duplicate this layout to get to the status tracking layout that we saw in the completed app. I'm going to press the duplicate layout button and I'm going to name it status tracking. I'm then going to close this one and navigate to status tracking. We're then going to open edit layout for this one, and you could see that the display mode for this one was the board and the status was obviously the status field. I'm just going to go through and make sure we display all of the statuses that we care about. And again, we're going to choose which of our fields we want to display on this preview. Perfect. Now we have those two layouts that we saw previously, and we're now going to create the My Leads and My Clients layouts. I'm going to go back to All Restaurants, open up Edit Layout, and once again duplicate the layout. Let's call this one My Leads because it's going to be used by the acquisitions team. We're going to change the display mode to rows here. And we're going to change some of the fields that we're going to show. So I want to see cuisine, that's already on, and I'd quite like to see the region as well in this one. Perfect. I'm going to save this layout. And then for the My Clients layout, we're actually just going to duplicate this again. I'm going to leave that exactly the same. So you can see now that I've got those 4 layouts that I had when I previewed the completed app, but I'm just going to pop back to the navigation settings and reorder them because I actually want My Leads and My Clients to come above the other 2 layouts. Now that I've got all of my list views set up, I want to make sure that the My Leads table is only seen by the acquisition team and the My Clients table is only seen by the onboarding team. In order to do that, I'm going to set up some roles. I'm first going to add a role for the acquisition team. And then I'm going to add a role for the onboarding team. When I add users from either of these roles, I'm going to assign the correct role to them. I'm now going to set it up so that only the user assigned to each role should see their relevant layout. So if I go to My Leads to start with and open up Edit Layout again, I can go to the role settings here. And at the minute it's set to be seen by everyone. However, I only want the My Leads table to be seen by anyone in acquisition. So I'm going to leave it like that and save. And I'm then going to do the same for My Clients. But for this one, I only want people from the onboarding team to see it. You'll remember that in the completed app, an acquisition agent or an onboarding agent could only see their leads or clients that were assigned to them. At the moment in our current setup, we have no way of assigning a restaurant to an acquisition agent or an onboarding agent. The way we need to set this up is by setting up a synthetic link in Stacker. But in order to do this, we need an underlying field in Airtable. I've just jumped back to Airtable to show the underlying fields that we need in order to be able to set up our synthetic links in Stacker. We need to have fields that have values that are going to match something in our users table in order to set up a link between this table and our Stacker user table. So for the acquiring agent and the onboarding agent, I could already have the names or the email addresses of the agent associated with each restaurant in these values here. However, I'm just going to leave them blank, and then I can assign the agents directly in Stacker. Let's go back to Stacker to set up our synthetic links. In order to set up the synthetic links that I can assign restaurants to a given agent, I'm going to go to the restaurant tables field settings, and I'm going to add a field. This is going to be a link to another record because what we're doing is linking the restaurants table to the Stacker users table. I want the restaurant's acquiring agent to match the user's email. I could actually select name here, but I'm going to go with email. We're then going to limit the records which can be selected because we want to make sure that when an agent is selected in this field, it only is an acquiring agent that's selected. We don't want an agent that is actually an onboarding agent to be selected here. So the filter that I'm going to add is that the role is acquisition. I'm then going to save this one. And I'm going to do the same, but for the onboarding agent. We can see now that we've got two synthetic links set up, one so that we can assign to an acquiring agent and one so that we can assign it to an onboarding agent. I'm now going to set up the filters for the My Leads and My Clients tables because I want to make sure that the records that appear in those lists are just the ones that are assigned to the particular agent that's logged in. So I'm going to open Edit Layout and go to Filter. And for the My Leads table, I want to make sure that the acquiring agent is the current user. And I'm also going to add a second condition here because when the acquiring agent marks it as signed and passes it off to an onboarding agent, I want it to disappear from this list because it's no longer relevant to their workflow. And so I'm going to add a condition that the status is any of sourced or contacted. I'm now going to do something similar for the My Clients table. I'm going to make sure that the onboarding agent is the current user. And I don't need to add a condition on the status, as only when it's been signed will it be relevant to the onboarding agent anyway. I'm now going to go and set up the detail view that we saw in the completed app. This is to make sure that it's really clear when reviewing all of the information associated with a particular restaurant, and then it's also really easy for the acquiring agents and the onboarding agents to move them through the different stages of the process and add information where necessary. First, I'm going to go and click into a particular restaurant to open up the detail view. It doesn't matter which one I select because whatever I do to the detail view for this restaurant will affect the detail view for all restaurants. I'm then going to open Edit Layout, and I'm going to start by just deleting this default container that Stacker gave us. And I'm going to change the template to a profile where I helpfully get the name of the restaurant and the logo here. I'm then going to select the profile fields and turn on some of these. Now that I've chosen which fields I want to show in the profile section, I'm going to go back and add some widgets to the main section of my detail view. I'm first going to add a highlight to display the status that the restaurant's currently at, because that's the most important piece of information that we've got in this app. And then I'm going to add the fields widget and turn some of the fields on. And I'll come back when it looks a bit more interesting. Now that I'm happy with the details contained in the detail view, I'm going to set up the tabs that we saw in the completed app that had the menu items and the documents that were linked to a particular restaurant. So I'm going to go to tabs and I'm going to add a new tab and I'm going to call it menu items. Then I'm going to add another tab and call this one documents. In the menu items tab, I'm first going to delete this default container we get, and I'm then going to add a record list widget. This is going to allow me to show records from the menu items table, but I only want to include the related records, so the ones that are linked to the specific restaurant that I'm currently viewing. I'm then going to do the same for documents. You can see that for this particular record, we don't have any menu items or any documents showing. This is just because the restaurant's only just been signed, so nothing has been linked or uploaded for them yet. So if we go back to all restaurants and pick on one of our live restaurants, you can see that the same configuration for the detail view is repeated, and they do have menu items and documents linked to them, so they can be reviewed here. The final thing that we're going to do in order to complete the configuration of our app is to set up the action buttons, which make the process of moving the restaurants through the different statuses much easier and prompt the onboarding or acquiring agents to add information where relevant. In order to do this, when we're on the detail view for any restaurant, we're going to open up Edit Layout and navigate to Page Buttons. Here we can add a custom action that we'd like to prompt our user to take at the relevant point throughout the process. So the first one would be after an acquiring agent has added a new lead. Once they have contacted them, they should mark it as contacted and add the contact details for the restaurant. So we're going to call it contacted, and the steps will involve updating the status. And here we want the status to be updated to contacted, and we want to remove the responsibility for selecting the right value. So we're just going to specify it for the user. If we save this action and then enable it, you can see we get a button here that they can press to mark the status as contacted. However, for the current record that we're on, LA Breakfast Club, they are already live, and so this action is not relevant to this restaurant. So what we're going to do is apply some conditional visibility to our action. So we need to press this eye icon. And the first thing we're going to say is that this action should only be available when the status is sourced. That way, when a new lead is added, the option to make it contacted appears. However, if they are any other status, this action won't appear. We also want to add another condition here because we would like to make sure that only the acquiring agent that is assigned to a lead can actually go through and edit that lead. So the next thing we're going to do is say that the acquiring agent is the current user. Now, once we save, we can see that that action has actually disappeared from here because neither of those conditions are currently met. I'm now going to set up the next custom action that I want my users to take, which is after they have been contacted to mark them as having signed. So let's name the action signed. And this one is a little bit more interesting because not only are we going to update the status to signed, we are actually also going to offer them the ability to upload the contract that they will have signed in the documents field. And then finally, the most important thing is that we want to allow them to assign it to an onboarding agent. So for this one, we're going to prompt them to assign to an onboarding agent. I'm now going to go through and do the same thing for the final two actions that we need to add, and then we'll review the conditional visibility for them at the end. I've now set up all of the actions that I'm going to need my users to take. So I want to make sure now that they'll only appear at the relevant time. So just like with contacted, where we set conditional visibility, we're going to do this for signed. So again, we're going to say that the status is contacted. And then again, we also want to make sure that the acquiring agent is the current user. Now for the next one, we similarly want to apply a status condition. But for this one, as it will then be passed over to the onboarding team, we want to make sure that the onboarding agent is the current user. And finally, we'll do something very similar for the last action. Now that we've done that, if we save the layout, you can see that all of our action buttons have disappeared. The final thing to do in order to check that we're happy with the way that the app works is to add 2 test users so that we can preview as them in order to see that only the relevant records are displayed and then only the relevant actions are displayed at the right time. To do this, I am going to go to users and I'm going to add a test user for the acquisition team and assign them the acquisition role. And then I'm also going to add an onboarding test user and assign them to the onboarding role. Now that's done, I should go and assign some of these records to these test users, and then finally we can preview as them to check that we're happy with how we set the app up. I'm now going to go through and assign some of these restaurants to our test users. And I'll just go back and add one more. If we add this one to both. Now that we've done that, if we go and preview as, we'll start by previewing as the acquisition user. So first we can see if we go to my leads that they've only got the one lead that we assigned to them that is pre the contacted stage, which is Outlaw Burger. You can see that we can see the appropriate action button, which is to move them on to contacted. If we press that and press save, you can see that it gets updated to contacted, and then we then have the next action, which is to make them signed. Here we can upload documents, and if we want to assign to an onboarding agent. If we then do that, and we can now switch to previewing as the onboarding test user. And if we pop back to my clients, you can see that we first of all have the one that we just assigned to ourselves, and we also have the one that we assigned earlier, which is already live. But if we pop into Outlaw Burger, you can see that we can mark them as onboarded and add the date. And then finally, we can make them live. So if we stop previewing and we're back in the app, that is the complete walkthrough of how to set up an internal tool in Stacker. If you'd like to learn more about more detailed Stacker functionality and other features that we have, then please head over to check out our documentation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact support. Thank you so much for watching.